Live from the constituency of Caroni East, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Minister of Education and Member of Parliament for Caroni East, Dr. Gopeesingh.
Thank you. Thank you. Our international distinguished and brilliant political leader and former Prime Minister, and soon to be re-elected for a second term as our Prime Minister. A warm welcome to Dr. Gregory Bissessa as well, my parliamentary colleagues, members of the executive of the United National Congress, all our constituents of Caronies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, and to all those who are viewing on Synergy and Jagriti and listening on the airwaves. A warm welcome to all of you here at Caronies in Eco Park in St. Helena. There are two areas I want to, if time permits. The first is the question of the economy. 2 days ago, you would have seen the polls on one of the newspapers which indicated that there was universal condemnation for this government and for Rowley and his government on four main areas. 93% of the population polled said that crime was in a crisis or was a crisis, and there were major concerns related to crime in the country. 77% of those polls said that the economy was in crisis and of major concern. And 73% said that there was a crisis as far as corruption is concerned with Rowley and his government and is of major concern. So there was universal condemnation for this Rowley-led government, not by our United National Congress speakers on a day-to-day basis, but by the wider population of a scientifically polled by the company that Express published. Now, the economy issue is one that Rowley and his team has, over a period of time, saying that because they have not been able to do the things that they could have done, it is because the Kamla Prasad Bissessa government left them in fumes and they had no money to run this government. I want to tell you tonight that that is totally untrue. It's a falsehood, and it is perpetuated and perpetrated by Rowley and his people even 4 years after they came into office. Because Mr. Bissessa left $117 billion in the treasury under her government when we demitted office. She left 11 billion US in the foreign reserve and 5.6 billion US in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Mrs. Bissessa's government took the Heritage and Stabilization Fund from 3.5 billion US to 5.6 billion in our short period in 5 years. That is close to $15 billion she increased the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And in one fell swoop in 4 years, the foreign reserve has dwindled from 11 billion now to 6.5 billion US. That is 4.5 billion US. And they raided the Heritage and Stabilization Fund on 2 occasions. And so they have been able to take out close to over $30 billion in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and the Foreign Reserve. And this is what they have been spending. And they have spent close to 240 billion TT dollars in the 4 years. Much more than the Kamla Prasad Bissessa administration spent in our first 4 years. And what have they got to show for it Absolutely nothing. Mrs. Bisesa can show that she built hospitals across country. She built highways across, 106 schools, 9 police stations, 7,000 homes, water lines across the country, 140 playing fields across the country were lit, and more and more. Mrs. Bisesa can say, you can feel it, you can touch it. But what can PNM say? Absolutely nothing. Mrs. Bisesa came year upon year to report to the population on her achievements and what she has done. For 4 years, PNM has not even been brave enough to come to this population and say, look, I have done this, we have done this. Absolutely not one thing they have done to say that they can be proud of. And remember when Mrs. Bisesa joined government, there was a $25 billion fiasco with CLICO, and we were owing $5 billion. PNM was owing $5 billion to the contractors, and this is what Mrs. Bisesa government had to deal with. They have borrowed close to 32 billion TT dollars already. What have they done with the $32 billion? Absolutely nothing. They have carried us into a debt trap where the debt to GDP ratio has moved from 42% to nearly 70%. And they are taking us to the hands of the IMF. And many of the senior members of this audience will know when the IMF came in here in the late 1980s, thousands of people lost their jobs. They couldn't be taken care of. And there was massive unemployment when the IMF put their conditionalities on. So under this PNM government, the rating agencies has downgraded Trinidad and Tobago. 2 well-respected rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, have downgraded Trinidad and Tobago to almost junk bond status. So borrowing money becomes much more difficult and much more expensive. So IMF is on our back. They are doing everything that the IMF wants them to do. And so this is going to be the 5th year of a budget presentation in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. And every time there's promise and promise, and they could never achieve anything that they promised. Small businesses have closed across the country. Medium businesses are closing. When you go around the country, people's businesses are up for rent because they cannot manage it. The people are crying, they're losing their houses, they're losing their vehicles. And PNM is smiling all the way and making excuses on a daily basis. So that's why the pollsters were able to show in a universal condemnation on the work in the economy that 77% of the people believe that there's a crisis and of major concern. There was no foreign direct investment and no economic diversification, which we have spoken about. My brothers and sisters, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have not spoken to the wider public on the education issue for a long time, except in Parliament. Mrs. Bisesa, as soon as she came into government, had her vision. Her vision was people-centered development. Her vision was for the people, serve the people. Her vision was for the children and for education. So that every year, Mrs. Bisesa ensured as Prime Minister that the largest budget went to education so that our people can become more and more educated and developed. Close to 16% of the budget went to education, up to post-secondary and tertiary. Close to 6% of the GDP, much more than the developed countries of the United Kingdom, United States, and Canada put to the budgets. This was the visionary Mrs. Bisesa at the helm of government, carrying the country forward in a move to educate and bring happiness and prosperity to our people. We were moving along other nations in the world, in keeping with Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Finland. We were becoming a world leader in education. And we were acknowledged by the United States contestant then, Mrs. Hillary Clinton, for the work that Mrs. Bisesa was doing in early childhood education. We became the first country in the world, as stated by Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the United Nations Secretary General, to have achieved universal early childhood education. The first country in the world. Mrs. Bisesa achieved that. So all 38,000 children aged 3 and 4 were able to get a place in early childhood education center. We free of charge, Prime Minister, free of charge. No parent had to pay for any child in any early childhood education center for them to go age 3 and 4. Because we partnered with the private sector, we partnered with Serval. We had over 200 early childhood education centers. So we made sure that all the children, the best time in your life, the neurodevelopment of a child at birth, 20% has taken place. By 3 years of age, 50% of the neurodevelopment of a child has taken place. And by 6 years, 90% of a child's brain development. So what is the best time to educate our children, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters? In the first 6 years of a child's life is critically important. And this is what Mrs. Bisesa knew. And this is why she did what she had to do. We surpassed the Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals. ICT became a watchword. Mrs. Bisesa made sure that 95,000 laptops were given to students, principals, supervisors, and teachers. Over 300,000 citizens of Trinidad and Tobago benefited because when these children took their laptops home, the parents and the siblings participated in the use and they became knowledgeable in ICT and ICT knowledge and application. So 300,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago became familiar with ICT and ICT in education because of the visionary perspective of Mrs. Bisesa in her government. We were moving alongside Uruguay, Argentina. Russia was now beginning to put 3,000 schools with ICT. And President Obama was asking the United States telephone companies and so on, ICT companies, to help him to put laptops for the children in their schools, in particularly schools which have been deprived. St. Lucia government knew the success of our ICT program, and they decided to ask Mrs. Bisesa for help. And Mrs. Bisesa and her team helped St. Lucia as one of the first Caribbean countries to have the ICT and laptops in their schools. 7,000 laptops. We trained thousands of teachers in ICT. 125 secondary schools had computer labs, some with 3 to 5 computer labs, some up to 30 computers in a lab. And not only that, 300 primary schools had computer labs, so the children were being educated in ICT in primary schools. And it was Mrs. Bisesa's dream that once we are re-elected in 2015, which we were deprived of, all the children from Standard 3 to Standard 5 were going to be given Android tablets. You can imagine what a revolution that would have taken. We had audiovisual rooms and smart boards in most schools. Wi-Fi connectivity up to 100 megabytes, bandwidth average of 20 megabytes. So a family next door to a school could have gotten bandwidth connectivity and be on the internet. OAS made Trinidad and Tobago, the Organization of American States, made Trinidad and Tobago the virtual education center for Latin America and the Caribbean. 3,000 plus students did ICT at CSEC. And we introduced ICT at Cape level for the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. Over 1,000 teachers had been trained in a Bachelor's of Education and a certificate in early childhood education. Over 36,000 children were really taken care of. Over 6,000 teachers were trained in ADR, mediation, ICT, language arts, and mathematics. And all teachers in primary schools had a bachelor's qualification. So no primary school in this country does not, or no primary school, all primary schools in Trinidad and Tobago have teachers who are qualified with their first degree. Mrs. Bisesa gave 2 million textbooks to students in our 5-year period. 2 million textbooks. How many textbooks have been given by this PNM government? Absolutely none. Our children are suffering because they don't have the textbooks and they don't have the workbooks, and their parents cannot afford to buy textbooks for $2,000 and $3,000. Every child in every school, in every subject, in every form, while Mrs. Bisesa was Prime Minister, got a particular textbook so that they could have used for their studies. So my brothers and sisters, we must not forget the 2,000 scholarships that were given to the students who did very well. And so there is much more time to speak to you on these matters. But it is important for you to remember that when the election is called in 2020, you must be able to differentiate, and I'm saying that to the 150,000 citizens out there who are listening and who try to still make up their mind whether they want to support us or not. That was the performance and part of the performance of Mrs. Bisesa and her government. Every one of her ministers performed so that the performance book of Mrs. Bisesa is as thick as this. So take note, this government has done absolutely nothing for you in health, in education, in crime, in the economy. But we were able to do for you what was destined for you when you voted for us in 2010. So we appeal to you, my brothers and sisters. Let's come together. Let's solidify. Let's work on the ground. Meet the people, greet the people, give them your message. And let us work together as one team so that the enemy of the PNM must be defeated and Mrs. Kamla Persad Bisesa regains a position, her rightful position as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago whenever the election is called. Thank you very much.